All right, so for module 2, I'm just going to briefly discuss the prologue that was posted to the website, and then also kind of go over one of the main components of the course, which is really the difference between conceptual definitions and operationally defined problems. So first, just some highlights from the prologue, which I'm hoping that you read during the previous module. Social workers have a duty to perform practice evaluation. So more and more you'll see within your field placements and places that you work that practice evaluation is actually something that's not only encouraged but required by a lot of agencies, because we want to see if what we're doing is actually working. Also, social workers should really share their practice and evaluation ideas with their clients. So not just gathering data from them, but being able to present it back to them in a way that they can understand. And partly through our project for the semester, we'll be able to conduct a real single system design that we can actually present back to our clients in a way that they should be able to understand clearly. Some other highlights: evaluation requires a little bit of extra time, but it's really an integral part of your practice. And the more that you do it, the more streamlined it becomes. Like anything else, the first time you do it is going to be the most challenging. But once you get that out of the way, it's really not going to take too much extra time. And it's really going to be worth the extra effort that you put into it. Also worth mentioning, social workers need to know what is meant by practical versus statistical significance. As we proceed in the semester and we talk a little bit more about the statistical component of the course that everybody worries about, even if somebody doesn't get to the point where they reach statistically significant change, practical significance is still important. If we notice that we're making a meaningful, valuable improvement in somebody's life, that should be something that we acknowledge and kind of celebrate. Okay, so back to the measurement component. And with conceptualization is naming what we see in a client situation. This is basically just naming an idea, a thought, a behavior. Not putting any kind of quantifiable terms to it, but more of just like a definition, like a dictionary definition or something that you might find in like a DSM. So if we're looking at ordinary versus scientific evaluation language, the difference between ordinary language that you might talk about like more in like a casual conversation, or maybe that your client uses, what's the difference between that and more of like a scientific description of a concept such as depression? And how can we know that we're talking about the same thing? That's why it's important to come up with a good conceptual defined problem. There are certainly standards within the field, such as the DSM, which can be used to come up with an agreed upon definition of what exactly constitutes depression. And somebody could say that they feel depressed, which could be a very mild symptom of maybe watching a sad movie or like a depressing thing on TV, versus like clinically significant depression, where somebody meets the full DSM criteria for a depressive disorder. So a concept is also known as a construct. You might see the two terms used kind of interchangeably. And this is kind of like the building blocks for our larger conceptual terms that we find in propositions and theories. So when we're measuring these concepts, a conceptual definition must first be specified. So conceptual definitions can include such things as clinical depression, alcoholism, triangulation, volunteerism, things that we kind of know colloquially what they mean, but conceptually defined, we can talk in more specific terms about how we're going to specify that. So for a conceptual definition of clinical depression, we could look at the DSM-5. Clinical depression is a mood disturbance of depressed mood, feelings of emptiness, sadness, or loss of interest in pleasurable activities. Another conceptual definition is alcoholism is a disease that includes the following: cravings, loss of control, physical dependence, and tolerance. Another good conceptual definition. Triangulation can occur when one member of a dyad seeks a third member to support them as an ally. That's a good conceptual definition of something that might be more difficult to put language to. And volunteerism exists when actions are freely taken by individuals, groups, or organizations that are beneficial to larger society. Another example is elder mistreatment by caregivers occurs when the responsible caretaker either physically or verbally abuses or neglects an elderly individual. So now that we've come up with a conceptual definition, we'd move into an operational definition, which is basically how we're going to measure those concepts that we came up with. So an operational definition allows a concept to be measured in terms of specific thoughts, feelings, or actions. So an example for depression might be the number of days in a 2-week period that Janet feels depressed most of the day. Number of days within a 2-week period. That's a good operationally defined problem to specify for depression. You could also do Charlie's score on a Beck depression inventory, so a score on a standardized measure. For our discussion of triangulation, it could be the number of times Phil calls his brother after an argument with Sandy in order to cause triangulation within that dyad. So kind of going back to where you find these conceptual definitions, a good example, it might be the DSM. There's other examples of articles or textbooks out there that give you good ideas for coming up with conceptually defined problems. But it's really on the author to kind of come up with an operationally defined problem specific to the client that they're working with. So you might find yourself looking at a conceptually defined problem and kind of wondering how you're going to go about measuring that. And I think kind of through practice and seeing how other people have done it is kind of one of the better ways to try to come up with a conceptually defined or operationally defined problem. So some examples here might be the number of minutes the client exercises per day is a good operationally defined problem because it specifies the behavior to be measured and also the frequency of measurement. Also might be ounces of soda consumed per day, minutes of sleep per night, number of cigarettes smoked per day, client's daily score on a Beck Anxiety Index scale. So for each of these examples, we're taking a conceptually defined problem, whether it be soda addiction or sleep disturbances, and putting a quantifiable term that helps us to measure that conceptually defined problem.